Hello, hello. I hope everyone's doing well. We had an amazing Christmas Day live, which is the day before yesterday. It is now the 27th, right this moment. Feels funny. All right, lipstick problems. Story of my life. Anyway, yeah, there were some interesting discussion about videos going forward in the new year and sort of what people might like to see, and which is perfect. That's kind of what I really wanted to get out of that experience if I could, along with, saying hello to everyone on Christmas Day if they didn't have any other plans. And somebody, I can't remember who anymore because I talked to a lot of people that day, somebody happened to mention the notion of poetry, and I was like, isn't that interesting? Because I did go to university for that very thing. One day I'll dig out the degree and the big photo that I have of being, I don't know what that's called. There's a tradition though, at least here. I don't know if this is done elsewhere, but here you get your head. There's like the I think it's the chancellor of the university. If not, it's the president, or it's one of those guys. They have you kneel on like a bench and they take their big fancy cap and you get to take your small little like mortarboard cap off and they like bonk your head. It's a weird old tradition. There's a picture of me having that done. And I can show it to you at some point. It's under my bed. It's kind of hiding away. Anyhow, I did do that. That was my field of study. So I found it interesting that somebody asked me about that. Now, that's not the only thing we talked about, by the way. There was an idea about recipes and potentially like people submitting recipes or maybe me sharing them. Nothing really concrete was established, but I was like, oh, that could be an interesting idea. Because I do a lot of cooking, so if somebody wants me to try something, I would try things. I try things all the time. I usually just search online for recipes that seem okay and give those a try. So if somebody else out there has an intriguing recipe for a baked good or, I don't know, anything. I like making soups and breads and all kinds of stuff. Doesn't have to be dessert. Anyway, so I thought that was a really cool idea, and to go back to the original, the poetry discussion, we talked a little bit about that and sort of doing like a monthly series perhaps where, I could read other people's work, that if they're comfortable sharing it and submitting it to me, I could do something with that. I realize that takes a certain degree of comfort and on the part of the writer. So I get it. You probably don't want your poem read on the internet for anybody to see. That can be a very intimidating experience to do. Trust how I know it. And it's hard to receive criticism, but I have a lot of experience with being criticized in poetry, because that's what you do when you're in university. You get criticized. It's kind of the name of the game, unfortunately, but it does help. It does make you get better at it. It's true. So, having said that, I happen to have on hand a lot of material from my time in university. I have old notes that I took when I was in lecture or in seminar. I have my old original drafts of poems where my instructors like actually wrote in pen on them, because this was back in those days when everything was on paper. It's probably all done digitally at this point, but in those days, no, it wasn't. It was all on paper. I also have a good collection of books of poetry, but I also have a good collection of memoir and things like that that those same poets, in a lot of cases, wrote. So that's cool. I have lots of poetry books that are signed first editions. You know, I've got a few neat kind of doodads like that that I love nerding out about. It's awesome. I just don't as a rule because I assume that most people are not interested in a form like poetry. But if people are, that's awesome. I don't mind discussing it. I just usually don't because I assume, wrongly probably, that others are not interested. What else? Oh, I should say, somebody mentioned they liked Edgar Allan Poe as that's their favorite. Which is great. I know we all have our favorites, so I figure it makes sense that I should mention, the poets I studied, the kind of period I studied, and all of that. So it's different wherever you go. If you go to a writing school in a university, there's different sort of biases of the program that you enter. That's just normal. In my case, I went to a school that is mostly concerned with Canadian canon literature that we've generated here in this country. I know a lot of people out there study, the old English poets. There's still scholars that specialize in, Beowulf and, very, very old poetry like that, written in Old English or Middle English or something like that. That's not my thing. I had to do some of that in school, like Chaucer, the Canterbury Tales, things like that I did have to do, but I will admit and own up front, it is not my favorite. My favorite, which is lined up with my school, was 20th century, I will say North American stuff, because I read a lot of American poetry, but it's from the 20th century. I really don't connect much with the older stuff, like Lord Tennyson or or something like that. That's not really my area. So I feel like I should be direct about that. But I studied mostly the confessionalists of the 20th century. American versions would be Sylvia Plath, Robert Lowell. I should have written these things down so I wouldn't have to think about it so hard. Oh, come on. There's lots more. Anne Sexton. If you're interested, you can go and look up more, of course. Those are just 3 off the top of my head examples. I read a lot of their work, but in a Canadian sort of themed program, it's kind of interesting because our literary canon is really, really brief here. We didn't really start having like a poetic arc of our own as a country until about the early 1960s. So it's all very recent, it's all very new. And a lot of it, I don't know if it's very widely appreciated. But one of the cool aspects of my program is that because the history of our literature here is so brief, it's so short compared to elsewhere, I got to meet a lot of people that actually wrote the stuff. Or if I didn't get to meet the writer directly, I got to meet another writer who knew that writer rather well. just because of the time frame being so short. So I also am lucky that a lot of teachers came to where I was living and taught at the university where I was going to go. I had no idea that it was going to be quite so prestigious. When I got to university, I was 25. I'm just thinking about it. No, I was still 24. I got there right before I was married, and I was married when I was 25. But I didn't appreciate, by virtue of my age, I didn't appreciate how accomplished a lot of these writers that I was talking to every day. I didn't know. I just didn't know how respected they were in the field. So I got to work closely with people who you might or you might not know about. I actually met Lorna Crozier when I was in high school still. It was way before I got to university, but she was the chair of our program, and she is a very, very accomplished and well-known Canadian poet. I got to meet her husband, Patrick Lane, who was also, he passed away, but he was a greatly respected and widely known Canadian poet and memoirist. He also wrote, I think, 1 or 2 novels as well, but he's mostly known for his poetry. I worked closely with Tim Lilburn, who, like Patrick Lane and Lorna Crozier, is a Governor General Award winner. That's I think that's the highest, most prestigious award for poetry in the country. And it's given to you by the Governor General. It's legit. It's the real thing. Anyway, I got to work with him very closely. I got to work with Carla Funk, who is perhaps less popular on the national scene by name, but she's written a lot, and I spent a great deal of time under her instruction, so I feel compelled to mention her. I think she's published 2 memoirs now, along with her poetry. I've read one of her memoirs. I'd be happy to read the next one too. Who else did I work closely with? I would say those are the main sort of people that I got to learn from directly, and they're all gifted teachers. I'm glad to have been lucky enough to know them. I could go on and on with stories about my ignorance, and if I met somebody like Tim Lilburn today, walking around, if I was in Victoria and I happened to see him, I would stop and I would shake his hand. I would say, "I'm so sorry. When you met me, I was 24 and I didn't know anything, like, at all. So thank you for tolerating me. Wow." Things were different back then. So anyway, other writers that I didn't meet personally that I really enjoyed on the Canadian scene, my very, very favorite is Bronwyn Wallace. She wrote the kind of poetry that I really, really connect with personally. Unfortunately, she died very young. She was 40 when she passed away. She had cancer. So she didn't write as much as I know she would have had she not lost her life to this terrible disease. But I have a signed first edition of one of her books, and I've got other poems that she wrote as well that are in anthologies and things like that. She wrote the kind of things that I really, really, really liked. And I feel like you will probably like them too, in that they are direct, they are unfussy, informal. She always used regular diction choice with her work. You know, there's a lot of conceptions about poetry that it has to be ornamental, Latinate kind of language, or it has to rhyme, or it has to follow a particular form, or something like that. And not that there's anything wrong with those things, there isn't, but they do have the potential anyway to restrict access. And I feel like that's part of the problem that we have in poetry, is that people think poetry, highfalutin, talking about trees, boring, right? Like that's immediately kind of what comes to my mind when I think of other people's impression of what this is. And you're not entirely wrong if that pops to your mind first and foremost. There is some work that's like that, but there's others work that isn't. And I would say somebody like Bronwyn Wallace, she wrote about subject matter that affected regular people. She herself was a regular person. I know she had an academic background and all of that stuff, but she also had real life experience and imparted that into her work, and didn't rhyme things. She didn't use formal structure to her poetry. She didn't write villanelles or, you know, pantoums or heroic couplets or sonnets or anything like that. She wrote, you know, a free form style using only direct language about things that real people are impacted by, like violence, domestic violence, criminality, homelessness, you know, these kinds of social matters. And that's the kind of work that I really enjoy looking at, reading, writing myself, just because I believe there's a limited access to poetry, you know, in the court of public opinion. And though it's not entirely wrong for the court of public opinion to feel that way, I'm all about, you know, fixing that, because it is a useful art form to distill difficult information, or complex, I should say, information, in both an artful but also a powerful way. You can really deliver a lot when you use fewer words rather than more. You just have to be really careful about the words you pick and how they're structured and things like that. Like there's lots and lots and lots of stuff, obviously, to think about and talk about. But I don't know, if people are into it, I think I would be game for going through these things and maybe refamiliarizing myself a little and reminding myself, oh yeah, I remember doing that, right? And maybe kind of imparting a bit of information that way out to you, and just, you know, because I think we all have the capability of writing this way. It just takes practice, and it takes time to sort of break down the barrier there that is apparently there, that it has to rhyme and it has to be, you know, about some area, some philosophical thing, some, you know, something that I don't connect with and I don't really want to write about. You know, like, and I'm happy to share, you know, examples of what I mean, from like my own work, but also from other people, obviously, too. And you can see that people, at least the ones that I studied closely, they didn't tend to write that kind of thing. And I think that's a message that needs to be kind of put put back out there is, no, poetry is not some weird archaic form. That's just a perception that's out there, and the only way to stop it from being this weird form that nobody really understands is to speak of it and shine a light on it and be like, oh, it doesn't have to be rhyming couplets all the time. Good, because English is the worst language for rhymes. There's not enough rhymes. Carla once told us in lecture, yeah, English is like rhyme poor. It's a very rhyme poor language, which it is. It's terrible. That's why you know all the rhymes. Listen to songs and you know all the rhymes. Love, glove, above. Always. Things like that. We know the rhymes because we have so few. Anyway, of course, this is not an exhaustive list. I'm happy to go over other subjects as well. We don't have to just talk about just poetry. I have lots of other books, but again, most of the literature that I studied happens to be Canadian. So we'll be looking at stuff from like, 1964, kind of up to now, really. There's still periodicals being published with new work all the time, so it's good. It is alive and well, it's just that nobody knows about it. So anyway, let me know if this is of interest to you, or if not, that's cool. Let me know what would be of interest, and we'll see what I can do with that. Anyway, that's all I have. This has already been long enough. Wow. If you're still here, thank you. You're amazing. Video call to action stuff, right? We have to hit the subscribe button that's up there, and there's a video down there. And yeah, I really hope that this can be something we can do going forward. I kind of want to get my books out now and have a look again and refamiliarize myself. So anyway, I'll see you later.